Have you ever listened to a piece of music that just makes you feel physically tense?
Oh, definitely.
Like, I don't just mean a sad song or, a track with heavy bass. I mean a composition where the rhythm is just slightly off. The notes absolutely refuse to resolve the way your brain expects them to, and it leaves you with this overwhelming kind of lingering sense of impending doom in your gut.
Yeah, it creates a totally visceral reaction. I mean, your body is biologically hardwired to find a pattern, right? It seeks that resolution.
Right.
And when that resolution doesn't arrive, your nervous system actually interprets that dissonance as a threat.
Yeah.
You just naturally go on high alert.
Exactly. And today's deep dive is rooted in a translated transcript from a really highly analytical Dutch geopolitical talk show called De Nieuwe Wereld.
A fascinating source, really.
It is. And the analysts on that show used exactly that kind of music, specifically these like atonal, arrhythmic, electronic loops as a direct metaphor for the era we are living in right now.
Because the situations they're dissecting are incredibly volatile.
They really are. And I want to be clear right up front. We aren't taking sides on the politics of any of this. Our mission today is just to impartially report on the content provided.
Right. We're just trying to convey the ideas contained in the original source material.
Exactly. But the mechanics of their argument are fascinating and, honestly, slightly terrifying. We're exploring their assertion that we are living through a profound, deeply disorienting era of global instability.
Looking specifically at the shifting power dynamics in the Middle East, the choking of global trade, and really the massive existential crisis currently facing NATO.
Okay, let's unpack this because I want to go back to that music metaphor, which the Dutch analysts spent quite a bit of time dissecting.
Yeah, they really leaned into it.
They did. They described the background music of our current geopolitical era as so oppressive, so neurotically tense, that one of their listeners actually compared the physical sensation to angina pectoris.
Wow, which is the clinical term for the severe chest pain associated with, a lack of oxygen reaching the heart muscle.
Right, it's that sensation of your arteries narrowing or being physically choked, like a complete inability to take a full, deep breath.
And the analysts use this as a frame for the current global climate. It's this feeling that our familiar reality is just actively breaking down.
They brought up this incredibly vivid analogy, actually. They said it's like watching a horror movie where the monster isn't some fantastical, multi-headed CGI creature.
Instead, the monster is someone you know.
Exactly. Someone deeply familiar, but their face is just slightly uncomfortably distorted.
It's the cognitive dissonance between what looks normal on the surface and the terrifying reality of what is actually happening underneath.
Yeah, and that underlying dissonance is really the defining characteristic of this decade, according to the transcript.
To ground that theory in concrete reality, the source points directly to the fragile ceasefire situation between Israel and Iran.
And this is where the gap between political rhetoric and physical reality becomes almost surreal. I mean, truly.
Yeah, it's a massive disconnect.
Because on one hand, you have the incoming U.S. administration, specifically Donald Trump, using this hyper-aggressive, winner-takes-all rhetoric.
Right, the source highlights him threatening to bomb enemies back to the Stone Age.
Right, it's incredibly loud, dominant language that projects total control. But the source points out that the actual reality on the ground, the physical mechanics of the agreements being discussed, it looks completely different.
What's fascinating here is how Iran has utilized a strategy of immense patience combined with just brute force geological engineering to completely alter the balance of power.
Geological engineering, you mean the bunkers?
Yeah. The analysts highlight that Iran has spent years building military and nuclear bunkers up to 500 meters deep into solid mountain granite.
Wait, hold on. We have bunker buster bombs, though, right? I mean, the U.S. military is practically built around having the cutting-edge technology to break things exactly like that.
You would think so, yeah.
So why does a deep hole in the granite change the geopolitical math so completely?
Because eventually, the physics of geology just beat the physics of munitions.
Really?
Yeah, a traditional bunker buster bomb works by using kinetic energy to penetrate earth and concrete before detonating. But when you put 500 meters of dense, solid granite between the surface and your critical infrastructure,
It just stops it.
exactly, you effectively neutralize the threat of traditional air superiority. The rock simply dissipates the blast. You cannot simply bomb those facilities out of existence from the sky.
Wow.
Iran knew this. They prepared for it. And by removing the threat of total aerial annihilation, they effectively force a situation where they can negotiate from a position of profound strength.
emerging as the regional winner, regardless of the booming rhetoric coming from the West.
Exactly.
Which, I mean, that explains the surreal nature of Iran's 10-point plan, which the Dutch analysts projected on screen during their broadcast.
It's quite the document.
It really is. When you
Yeah.
look at the mechanics of this plan, it does not read like the plea of a nation on the ropes, begging for a ceasefire.
Not at all. It reads like the demands of a victor dictating terms to the vanquished.
The demands are just sweeping and unapologetic. I mean, they include a total end to U.S. sanctions.
Which is huge.
Right. And the creation of what effectively amounts to their own localized toll booth in international waters, plus a complete halt to Israeli military attacks in Lebanon.
These are non-negotiable terms dictated by a party that firmly believes it holds the stronger hand.
So if the 500-meter bunker renders U.S. air superiority moot, and Iran knows they hold the cards, how did the U.S. get pulled into this hyper-aggressive posture to begin with?
That's the real question.
The source details some behind-the-scenes decision-making that honestly made my jaw drop. They cite a New York Times report regarding how this recent escalation was pitched to the incoming U.S. administration.
The transcript details the assertion that Israel effectively maneuvered the U.S. into this conflict posture via a literal PowerPoint presentation.
A PowerPoint.
Yeah. According to the reporting discussed on the show, Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a highly polished pitch to the Trump team. The presentation essentially promised that the opposing military apparatus could be quickly decapitated, bringing Iran to its knees in a matter of weeks.
Unbelievable.
And crucially, the slide deck assured the U.S. administration that the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most vital arteries for global trade, would remain completely open and secure.
Wait, so you're telling me a major geopolitical escalation was sold via a PowerPoint pitch that promised a quick, clean victory?
That is the specific argument presented in the source.
I'm just struggling to wrap my head around this. A potential regional war with massive global economic fallout was just a polished slide deck.
The analysts frame it as a staggering level of institutional hubris and a profound underestimation of the adversary. And the transcript notes an incredibly revealing detail about that meeting.
Oh, right, about J.D. Vance.
Yeah, J.D. Vance was initially the only dissenting voice in the room, warning against the endeavor, before he ultimately fell in line with the broader consensus of the team.
Let's pause on that. Why would J.D. Vance be the lone dissenter there?
Well, it illustrates the competing political philosophies currently vying for influence, right? You have the traditional hawkish wing that favors aggressive foreign intervention and projecting strength abroad.
Sure.
And then you have the more populist, isolationist wing that Vance represents. That wing is highly skeptical of foreign entanglements, preferring to focus resources domestically.
So his initial dissent highlights a deep internal hesitation about getting dragged into another endless Middle Eastern conflict.
Precisely.
But the PowerPoint won out, and this brings us right back to that cognitive dissonance. You have a clean, sanitized slide deck promising a neat, orderly victory.
Which is completely disconnected from reality.
Right. The messy 500-meter deep granite reality on the ground. And because of that massive underestimation, the source argues the entire global map is shifting beneath our feet right now. Because geopolitics isn't just about who has the biggest missiles.
No, it's about choke points. It's about trade.
Geopolitics is, at its core, geoeconomics.
And the transcript details how Iran, leveraging its newfound strength, is now in a position to demand a $2 million toll for large ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz.
$2 million per ship.
Yeah, a toll they plan to share with Oman. They are blatantly asserting the right to establish the fundamental rules for safe passage.
A toll booth in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, how do they actually enforce that without a massive, dominant blue water navy?
Well, to enforce a toll, you don't need a fleet of aircraft carriers. You just need the credible threat of localized, land-based anti-ship missiles stationed along the coast.
You see.
That threat alone alters the risk algorithms for global maritime insurance. The massive insurance syndicates in London will simply refuse to cover these cargo ships, or they will skyrocket the premiums to unaffordable levels.
Unless the shipping companies pay the toll to guarantee safe passage.
Exactly.
For anyone listening right now, this isn't just an abstract conversation about cargo ships in a distant desert. This is about why the price of your groceries, the cost of the electronics you buy, or the fuel you put in your car might suddenly double overnight.
They are taking control of the physical arteries of the global economy.
And they are systematically building a parallel architecture to support it. The Dutch analysts brought up a map showing Russia's deep structural involvement in this process.
Russia is actively providing vital satellite data and reconnaissance to Iran.
But more importantly, they have created a massive shadow fleet of oil tankers and cargo ships.
Right.
How does a shadow fleet actually operate? Like, I hear that term thrown around, but what does it mean practically?
A shadow fleet operates by bypassing traditional Western financial and regulatory hubs. Typically, a commercial ship relies on Western protection and indemnity clubs, P&I insurance, to operate legally in international ports.
Okay, so the shadow fleet just skips that.
They simply ignore it. They use obscure corporate structures, often registering ships in nations with lax oversight, and they utilize non-Western insurance providers, heavily backed by the Russian and Iranian states.
Wow.
So they're effectively operating a multi-billion-dollar logistics network entirely outside of Western financial systems.
And their reach isn't localized either. I mean, the source points out that this alliance is pushing its influence all the way down the coast of East Africa.
Yeah, they specifically mention new cooperative security and economic agreements with Madagascar.
Madagascar. So they aren't just resisting the West, they are methodically establishing an entirely separate global trade and security architecture that actively excludes the West.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this squeeze on global trade routes leads directly to a massive, immediate crisis for the West.
Because the U.S. administration is aggressively pushing to pull Europe into this Middle Eastern conflict.
Right. Demanding they send their own naval assets to help patrol these waters and enforce blockades against this new shadow architecture.
And this immense pressure is setting up what the analysts call a make-or-break moment for NATO.
It really is.
The source goes as far as to argue that NATO is currently facing its greatest existential crisis since its inception in 1949. If Washington demands military participation in the Middle East and European nations flatly refuse, the entire foundation of the alliance could fracture.
But to understand why that fracture is so terrifying, we have to understand how Europe actually functions.
Right.
We have to understand the specific role the United States has played in Europe since the end of the Second World War. The Dutch analysts use a very blunt, highly specific term for the U.S.
They call it the European pacifier, right?
Yeah, or simply Big Daddy. For roughly 70 years, Europe has enjoyed an unprecedented historical luxury.
Because the United States provided a massive, unbreachable nuclear and conventional military umbrella.
Exactly. And because of that, European nations have been able to dramatically underfund their own defense budgets. They redirected that capital to build robust social welfare programs,
allowing them to play the role of the highly civilized, peaceful continent. So the U.S. hasn't just been a shield against outside threats. It's been a babysitter keeping the kids inside the house from fighting each other.
That is the exact dynamic. Before 1945, Europe spent centuries in a state of near-constant, devastating internal warfare. The underlying geopolitical argument in the transcript is that the absence of a dominant external referee will inevitably allow old historical rivalries to resurface.
Because suddenly the hierarchy of power isn't being rigidly set by Washington anymore. If the babysitter leaves the house, the kids have to figure out who is in charge.
And that leads to a chilling question posed by the transcript. If NATO splits and the U.S. withdraws its security guarantees, what does an unbacked European defense structure actually look like?
Well, you have France, which already possesses its own independent, formidable nuclear arsenal.
And you have Poland, which, sensing this shift, has been rapidly building one of the strongest, most heavily armed conventional land armies on the continent.
And you have Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe, suddenly feeling the immense pressure to fundamentally rearm itself.
And the idea of a rapidly rearming Germany triggers deep historical anxieties across the entire continent.
Without a doubt.
Without the United States enforcing a unified, cooperative structure, the analysts argue that these nations will inevitably return to internal competition, strategic suspicion, and historical fragmentation.
The balance of power won't be collective anymore. It will be fiercely regional and fiercely competitive.
It's the return of the old ghosts.
It really is. And this is where the analysts on Nieuwe Wereld broaden the lens in a really profound way. The potential collapse of NATO, the shadow fleets bypassing Western finance, the 500-meter deep bunkers.
These aren't just isolated, depressing news stories.
Right. According to the source, they represent the definitive mechanical death of an entire geopolitical era. They call it a 1989 moment.
It's a crucial historical parallel.
Yeah.
But they argue we are experiencing it in reverse.
In reverse.
Yeah, think about what 1989 actually looked like. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, we didn't just see a shift in political rhetoric. We saw the physical, tangible collapse of massive economic systems.
We saw borders being erased, and entrenched authoritarian institutions disintegrating overnight. The Western sphere of influence rapidly expanded.
Today, the source argues we are witnessing the exact opposite. We are seeing the physical, tangible contraction of the West's influence and the collapse of the institutions that upheld it.
It's like watching invisible walls going up. Instead of concrete blocks falling in Berlin, it's digital firewalls being erected.
Yes.
It's toll booths in the Strait of Hormuz. It's parallel financial systems where Western sanctions simply bounce off. The walls are closing in, not opening up.
And more than just the contraction of institutions, the source focuses heavily on the collapse of an illusion. They dissect the death of the post-Cold War Western mindset.
Right.
Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was this prevailing, almost arrogant belief, held primarily by a highly educated, globalized elite, that history had essentially been solved.
Oh, the famous end of history theory.
Exactly. The operating theory in the halls of Washington and Brussels was simple. If we just export our technology, if we just connect everyone on Earth to the internet, then the entire global population will naturally, inevitably adopt Western liberal democracy.
The assumption was that our consumption habits, our political systems, and our universal morals were the final evolution of human society.
This raises an important question. What happens to a civilization when it wakes up and realizes its absolute universal truths are actually just regional preferences?
That is such a heavy thought.
It's the painful reckoning the source describes. The West is now being forced to learn how to negotiate and share the planet with powerful regimes it fundamentally disagrees with morally and politically.
Because for decades, the baseline assumption was that Western military superiority or our perceived moral high ground would automatically win every negotiation.
And the source makes it abundantly clear that this assumption is dead. We are moving rapidly from a unipolar world.
A system where a single hyperpower, the United States, dictates the terms of global engagement.
Right, to a highly fragmented, multipolar reality.
And for you listening right now, multipolar simply means there are now multiple regional heavyweights. There's no single referee anymore.
The West is simply one player among many.
Sitting across the negotiating table from nations that have entirely different value systems and, crucially, the military and economic leverage to enforce their will.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because it wasn't just that the rest of the world rejected the Western liberal model. The very tools we believed would spread that model actually turned on us.
The transcript points out that the internet, the great connector, the technology that was supposed to unite humanity in a harmonious global village, has instead done the exact opposite.
The historical irony is just profound.
It is. Rather than fostering a unified global consciousness or spreading liberal democracy, the source notes that the digital revolution has violently fractured us.
It has driven populations into highly tribalistic, deeply polarized, and often extremist camps.
And this is happening globally, but more dangerously, it is happening within our own domestic borders. Instead of universal understanding and shared reality, we got algorithmic tribalism.
So the tool of our supposed enlightenment became the engine of our own internal fragmentation. We thought we were building a global town square, and instead we built millions of isolated echo chambers.
It brings us right back to that feeling of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, the surface looks like technological progress, but the underlying machinery is actively pulling society apart.
Absolutely.
So I want to bring this directly to you, listening right now. What this deep dive reveals, drawing from the intense analysis into New World, is that we are actively living through the violent shifting of historical tectonic plates.
The familiar pacifier of American global dominance is slipping away.
That unquestioned umbrella of military security and trade enforcement that defined the last 80 years. And in its place, regional powers are successfully asserting their own rules, building shadow fleets, and securing their own choke points.
And it is entirely understandable if this feels oppressive, chaotic, or deeply anxiety-inducing.
It feels exactly like that atonal or rhythmic music we talked about at the very beginning.
Yeah, the beat is completely off.
The notes aren't resolving and your brain just can't find the pattern, but recognizing the mechanics of why this is happening.
Understanding the physics of the deep granite bunkers.
The failure of the corporate PowerPoint illusions.
And the historical reality of a fragmented Europe without its babysitter.
All of that is the crucial first step to navigating this new reality. So what does this all mean?
It's the ultimate question.
If the old world order was held together by one superpower acting simultaneously as the military shield, the economic anchor, and the global referee, and if that referee just abruptly walked off the field, What new, completely unpredictable alliances are forming in the shadows right now?
That is a dissonance we're all going to have to learn to listen to.